What up, what up, what up, world? You already know what time it is. We're Matt Mr. Host with the most never need to brag no more. So all we ever do is give a toast to the real folks. Real big in a real way for us players to play. And parlay this great game that we got for y'all today. Wow, from BGF to the DLA. I have to make this short because people talk about the war on crime, the war on poverty, the war on drugs, but they never talk about the war on racism. How it's messed up, because put us in a conundrum, dumping drugs, wars, and everything on us at the same time. We were fighting racism, so it looked like something else was always the issue. The prevailing underlying sentiment was that racism had to be eradicated, but everything else under every other social activity is based on racism. All 9 areas of activity. Dr. Meaningful said. So let's unpack the fact that there was black militants that were going to war for racism against the oppressive regimes, both on the inside and out. It was something I wanted to share with y'all. I want to break it down for y'all real quick. New to the Black Gorilla family. Introduction. This is George Jackson. And he's gonna break it down real quick for y'all. Real men get down.
Second dimension of fascism, the terrorist face. Let's prove that this terrorism won't work on us. It won't stop our movement.
This is the BGF oath. Weusi Gaidi Jama, that means Black Gorilla Family. If I should break my stride, I falter at my comrade's side, this oath shall kill me. If my words should prove untrue, should I betray the chosen few, this oath shall kill me. Should I submit to greed or lust, should I betray the people's trust, this oath shall kill me. Should I grow lax in discipline, in time of strife refuse my hand, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand, this oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the gorillas of Black August. Weusi Gaidi Jama.
Greetings and salutations. It's your host, Gabe Morales, back with another series, this time on past Black Gorilla family members and associates, A through Z. First off, just as with any of my other videos, please feel free to disagree with me in the comments section on any information I spit out. Just make sure that you do it respectfully, or the comment will be removed and you will be banned from this channel. Simple as that. I don't have time for haters or trolls or games. Much of the information I'm about to share came directly from Bureau of Prisons and California Department of Corrections validation lists. So don't get mad at me if I mention your name, get mad at them. And some of the information also came from the Maryland Department of Corrections, although I concentrate on the California branch far more than the Maryland branch. And there are some distinct differences, which I'll get into later. It is my understanding California Department of Corrections no longer supposed to even track BGF, but they do still track disruptive individuals who may or may not belong to security threat groups. So like I said, the BGF is quite a bit different from these other groups, as it has usually been focused on prisoners' rights and Black nationalism. although some have engaged in criminal activities prior to and even during their incarceration, as we shall see. I've done a few videos on criminal justice reforms that you might want to check out if you're more interested in civil rights. Before I get into the history of the BGF in this introduction, I should probably cover a few concepts. Black nationalism is a movement which seeks liberation, equality, representation, and or self-determination for Black people as a distinct national identity in America, which many of them view as a post-colonial state. You hear time and time again that many followers of Black nationalism consider the USA to still be a slave state. I'll bet to examples such as institutional racism, police brutality, and prison oppression, where many Blacks, according to them, are frequently victimized, brutalized, and chained while in custody. Some Black nationalist proponents have sought to establish a self-governing, independent nation state for Black people, basically preaching separatism. Some have sought to go back to Africa, like Marcus Garvey preached approximately 100 years ago. It is interesting to me that some Black nationalists in the past have felt that white nationalists are correct in pushing for their own separate Aryan nations. Others say that modern Black nationalism just aims for social, political, and economic empowerment of Black communities within white society as an alternative to assimilation and as a way to ensure greater representation and equality in predominantly Eurocentric white culture and power in America. There is no unified concept of this movement, thus accounting for much of the infighting, even assassinations of leaders of rival factions that believe in whole or in part in Black nationalism. Critics of Black nationalism, many of them being Black, say that it promotes racial and ethnic separatism and Black supremacy, and they say that is no different than white nationalism or white supremacy. These are often elderly African Americans who grew up under Dr. Martin Luther King's philosophy of fighting for Black people's rights via nonviolent, peaceful protests, but getting along with whites in the end. Many believe that MLK was killed for his beliefs.
At last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Others, like Malcolm X, were hardcore Black nationalists opposed to getting along with Whitey, and they combined religion as justification for the beliefs and called for victory.
To bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, and first here in the United States, and bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary.
It should be noted that after Malcolm made a pilgrimage to Mecca and personally saw many blue-eyed, fair-skinned believers who he previously addressed as blue-eyed devils, that he had a change of heart as well as beliefs, and many think that he was killed for it. Historically, Black nationalism has been the target of suppression campaigns by state and federal agencies, such as J. Edgar Hoover's COINTEL program. You can see my video on J. Edgar Hoover for more about that. I won't get into too deep into prisoners' rights, but I have done several videos also on criminal justice reform, so you might want to check those out. But I will state that according to the American Civil Liberties Union, the United States still has the highest incarceration rate in the world and is 5 to 10 times higher than nations like Canada, France, and the United Kingdom. They also point out that a Black man is 6 times more likely to be incarcerated in the United States than a white man is. I don't have time to get in all the reasons why I believe that is, but I believe part of it is racism, but it's much bigger than that. According to the ACLU, the United States is the only democracy in the world that has no independent authority to monitor prison conditions and enforce minimal standards of health and safety. I believe they're talking about on a national basis. There are groups like the American Correctional Association and American Jail Association who do discuss those issues, but I believe what they're saying is there might be oversight at the state and local level. While I focus on past members and associates and supporters of the BGF in this series, many who portray themselves as I have several family members that were locked up and addicted to drugs and alcohol. Many people are not aware that who ran a breast many protests for human rights and protests against the police until I had a falling out with its director. You can read more about that. 87 to 1993. While the BGF was known to be very violent during the 1960s and 70s, they began to be less active, many of whom didn't want to be told by the BGF on what to do. A good example would be Raymond Washington, which is a big reason why I say that there is no way that Raymond ever meant Crips to mean Common Revolution in Progress. He didn't want to have nothing to do with the BGF when he got to prison, and they were all about Common Revolution in Progress. You can see some of my videos on Crips and Bloods for more on that. As I've stated many times before, I learned from a lot of people that came before me. One of those was my mentor, Robert Mocha-Muriel, the founder of the California Gang Task Force. While he concentrated mostly on Mexican Mafia, he was also privy to information on the other big prison gangs, the West Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, and Black Guerrilla family. He often met with individuals such as Sergeant Bill Hankins, who started off at San Quentin prison even before the BGF started, and was very aware of George Jackson and other BGF members. In his book Alpha Guard, he covers them, in particular in chapter 16, Rise of the Black Guerrilla Family, and in chapter 23, where he talks about working undercover, tracking the BGF in the early 1980s. Another individual I learned from was Brian Perry, who started off as a parole agent in Los Angeles, then moved on to be a special services agent, then became head of the prison gang unit in the California Department of Corrections. In his book, Eye of the Devil, he covers the BGF on page 170. He also covers the Kumi 415 on page 282. I won't get a lot into the Kumi. However, you should be aware that they're still pretty big in the San Francisco Bay Area, in particular in Oakland, where the BGF also had a stronghold for many years. As far as the formation of the BGF, once again, it was known to be the most political of all California prison groups. In my research and direct conversations with BGF members, as well as CDC confidential files, it is believed that they started in 1966 as the Black Family, led by George Lester Jackson, and the Black Vanguard, led by W.L. Nolan. While at Soledad Prison, Nolan initiated a class in 1969, W.L. Nolan versus Cletus Fitzharris. Jackson's group was first called the Revolutionary Armed Movement, or RAM, that aligned with the Black Panther Party. There is that was active around 1965, but 1966 is generally the date that people state that Jackson's group was called the Black Family as a revolutionary organization. Even back as far as 1968, the Black Family formed an alliance with the Nuestra Familia Mexicana organization, and they both developed revolutionary philosophies, as I showed several times during the NF roll call series. They also communicated often with revolutionary organizations and individuals out in the street. According to retired LAPD Detective Wayne Caffey, who grew up in South Central LA during the 60s and 70s with many street gang members who later became prison gang members, and organizations such as the Black Panther Party of Los Angeles, Apprentice Bunchy Carter was a Black Panther leader killed on the UCLA campus by Ron Karenga's rival United Slaves in January 1969 over a fight about who would run the Afro-American Studies Center. According to respected experts like Rufus Downs from LA Sheriff's Department and Kenny Ballard from CDC Special Services Unit, Bunchy Carter's little brother, Kenneth Petit Carter, eventually became the #1 BGF leader in prison, attaining. According to past practice, the BGF hierarchy consists of a supreme commander, a commander, 2 generals, captains, and lieutenants. The BGF first gained national spotlight as the Soledad brothers when, on January 14, 1970, 3 convicts, including W.L. Nolan, were shot to death by Soledad gunner O.G. Miller. This 3 days after the incident, Soledad Corrections Officer John Mills was hurled to his death from a tier. Accused in this murder were George Jackson, Cleta Drungo, and John Collet, who still maintains his innocence even today. They were all charged with murdering Mills in retaliation for the homicide of the 3 black inmates killed earlier by individuals at San Quentin Isolation Center in the summer of 1970. It was at this same time that black prisoners became
And racist practices that is practiced here, dealing with self-advancement through education. We come together primarily in order to educate our brothers into a revolutionary culture vein.
Brothers are getting arbitrarily harassed on the yard every day. They're taken to the holes, you understand? Our haircuts, you understand me? They complain about our hair, things of this nature. We can't have literature. We can't support our brothers. We can't say black power right on, We can't relate to our own lifestyles within the penitentiary. We have to relate to some automatic prison robot. You see, they took brothers to George Jackson. You see, took him to the old man for saluting the brother when he come out on the yard to go for a visit. And these are the things that's happening to us, man. And our people are
was very hostile, ranting and raving that Jonathan Jackson was never a BGF member and that I was all wrong. But just like this series, I considered Jonathan Jackson to be a very, very close associate. In fact, George describes Jonathan wrote, "People have said that I'm my brother's case." In the movement in general, a person that was close to me once said that my life was too wrapped up in my brother's case and that I wasn't cheerful enough for her. It's true. I don't laugh very much anymore. I have but one question, people that think like you do. What would you do if it and took matters into his own hands and burst into the Marine County Courthouse and agreed to free several BGF with hostages in exchange for his brother George? With hostages in tow at point, McGee was unconscious and seriously wounded. McGee was still alive years later at the facility due to his age. Marine was not a member, but a very close associate. And after his death, George Jackson became enraged and sought revenge, forming the August 7th movement. On July 21st, 1971, Correctional Officer Leo Davis was murdered while trying to save the life of an inmate at the hospital in San Quentin. The inmate had been scheduled to testify against the Soledad brothers. 2 suspects, Lawrence Justice and Earl Gibson, were charged, tried, and convicted of Davis's murder, but appealed and later gained acquittal. Hugo Yogi Pinnell was also accused of killing Officer
Rounds into that door. That cell door was swung open and they were being held hostage. with their throats slit, and the inmates were trying to pierce their jugular vein with a short 1-inch piece of pencil. 5-round burst. Attention scattered them. They knew we were meaning business serious. They ran out of the cell. The 2 officers were able to get themselves untied and run out to us. And one of them had 108 stitches in his neck.
I'll get in more details when I get to George Jackson, but just know that that was considered a major event. And it's my understanding that after that event, the Black family was called the Black Guerrilla family. Being that Jackson was already dead, the individual was accused of being involved in that bloody day. Even Bob Dylan wrote a song that goes, "Lord, Lord, they cut George Jackson down." It is documented that 1 month after George Jackson was killed, Jeffrey Katari Galden killed a correctional staff member named Robert Turner, Folsom Prison, and he became the recognized leader of the BGF. Jeffrey Galden was called Qatari, which means in Arabic, member of the warrior class, and was credited with writing the very first BGF Constitution. And in 1973, I won't get too much into their Constitution during this series, but you can read those documents more in depth in my BGF book. They have had a structure and hierarchy since Jeffrey Galden wrote the first Constitution. Like other prison gangs, if you left, the punishment was death. However, there has been occasions due to lack of membership where they have taken back previous BGF members in bad standings. But in order to prove themselves again worthy, they have to conduct a mission, and they often use the symbol of a black dragon, which was one of George Jackson's nicknames, as one of their symbols. Galden then died in August of 1978 as a result of a head injury suffered in a football game. According to the BGF, he was previous 10 years, except one incident at Corcoran Prison that involved a BGF on BGF cellie murder. As I stated, the Nuestra Familia had a loose alliance with the BGF, and the Mexican Mafia Brotherhood had an alliance against the BGF and Nuestra Familia. However, there are exceptions, and I'll get into those later in this series.
Foremost back Jackson just had one hit on the lower yard. Give me a piece of quarter. Back Jack, you want? Oh, we just had a couple hit on the lower yard. 2 on ground. 2 hit, we got 1 6. All right.
There was a Pearl Harbor type attack on. Right now, the situation is so tense that I don't think there's any way we can safely release the general population. The only way we're going to keep peace among them is just not allow them the opportunity to get at one another.
We know the mafia, was involved. We know the mafia initiated the action, but
You mean the Mexican?
Mexican mafia, yeah. So they've been.
Thank you.
They and the blacks have been at odds, but trying to. The different leaders have been talking, trying to kind of quiet down. Supposedly.
The BGF also had an oath that you heard in the very first part of this introduction and will be played at the front of all subsequent videos. And as stated in that oath, leaving the BGF or betraying it is punishable by death. There's also the I stand firm oath, which states that I stand firm in the name and spirit of the falling fire-breathing dragon, which means George Jackson. We, the members of the BGF who strive for impeccability, will rage on throughout immortality. Long live the graceful guerrilla. Long live the will to win. Long live the undoubtful fighting spirits. Family forever. I stand firm. Once again, from observing these individuals as well as speaking to them, I had many good mentors, which are acknowledged in the back of my BGF book. Along the way, I learned some new things and also resolved some myths that I heard prior. I hope to do the same in this series. It is not my intention to prove anybody wrong or have bragging rights, but to find out why these groups really started and how they really evolved. I hope you enjoy this series and continue supporting and watching this channel.
Yeah, man, the BGF wasn't playing no game. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, officers were out there. So certain things happen. And people get, you know, start having an extremist mindset because you ain't gonna pick off all my people on the outside because of the color of the skin. And on the inside, it was like sitting ducks. So they had to band together, go to the extreme. So I understand where they're coming from, you know. Social justice and equality. They weren't even thinking about selling dope in the prison or nothing like that. They just wanted to live a life where they can feel free as a man, you know. You get the freedom, physical freedom. They just wanted to be free as a man, and that's commendable, you know. Already being in jail is it's hard enough, you know. That read the Black Liberation Army, you know. Black gold, the black, red, black, and green, you know. So, Sarah Shakur was a part of that. She was a product of that. So that's why people don't really know how deep this shit goes. The BLA was another route. I didn't take no under covert operated properly.
Was long before the Black Panther Party. I think that the BLA has some of its manifestations, not all of them, in Deacons for Defense. They came out of Bogalusa, Louisiana. Some of it can be found in Robert Williams, Monroe, North Carolina. You know, with Black.
That also was a part of the Black Power movement, you know? The church deacons. They really did to protect, you know? So the Deacons for Justice were the ones taking Martin Luther King's back.
People even took up arms to defend themselves. Some go back to Nat Turner. You know, Denmark vested the slavery rebellions, you know. We like to think that there was a Black Liberation Army from the time that Black people stepped foot on the shores of North America. But to answer the question in more contemporary times, I would take the position that the BLA arose out of the Black Panther Party. And that rise came about due to the counterintelligence program that was waged against the Black Panther Party and other segments of the Black Liberation Movement. The BLA was an organization. I take the position that the BLA came about, the Black Panther Party gave birth to the contemporary Black Liberation Army. This was a very difficult birth, meaning that the BLA was born in blood. It was premature, but the conditions of the time and the split within the Black Panther Party made us have to move the way we started moving. But if we had had more time, I think that we could have did a much better job in terms of developing the Black Liberation Army. Well, it was two major factors. I mean, it all stemmed from the counterintelligence program. Once J. Edgar Hoover started waging war against the party, a lot of things started happening. A lot of Panthers started getting framed up on trumped-up charges, sentenced to long prison sentences. There was a lot of conspiracy cases going on during that time. Panther 21 case, which involved Sunday Island, a number of other Panthers. There were killings taking place through the government, Fred Hampton. The counterintelligence program of US organization, pitting us and the Panthers against each other, alleged the death of Bunchy Carter and John Huggins of UCLA. Even the shootout with Bobby Hutton and whatnot, manifestation can be found within the counterintelligence program. So those were some of the conditions that forced people to have to go underground. Then there was a split within the Black Panther Party, which we now take the position that much of that was orchestrated by the counterintelligence program. It was exploited. And it started pitting Panthers against each other. And, people didn't feel safe, caused a number of Panthers and chapters around the country to be expelled. I just want to clarify some things in regards to the split. There are those who take the position that it was East-West Coast split, but the split was much deeper than the East-West Coast thing. We need to be real clear on that. New York Panther 21 was on. Now that's prior to the New York chapter being expelled. They expelled the Panther 21 was expelled, and then later the chapter was expelled. But not only did that's New York being on the East Coast, but also the LA chapter was expelled. It's a West Coast thing. Had leadership here on the East Coast of the Black Panther Party on the East Coast being expelled from the party, while the Panther, you had people on the East Coast decided to go with Huey. For example, the Baltimore chapter, they went with the West Coast. So it was not, the split was much deeper than the East-West Coast thing. It had a lot to do with the leadership of the party at that time. It had a lot to do with police repression that brought this about. The split in part was brought about due to the counterintelligence program. And due to the pressures that the counterintelligence program was placing upon the party, there were those in leadership, and some of their thinking was that they wanted to de-radicalize reformist, things that they were doing in terms of organizing the masses of people. There are those that say that the Black Panther Party existed for 16 years, from 66 to 82, a revolutionary organization from 1966 to 1971. And in 71, well, that was when the New York chapter was expelled and whatnot. We on the East Coast, not well, I won't say East Coast. We're here in New York. We had a very short run in the Black Panther Party. The party came to New York in the spring of 1968, and by the summer of '71, it was over with for us. You know, we had a 3-year run in the Black Panther Party, but it was a very intense 3 years, very, very intense. I mean, we crowded, I would say, 30 years into those 3 years. And those 3 years, due to, among members of the Black Panther, who were in their 60s, late 50s, who are still affected from that period of time, it had a profound effect upon a lot of people, you know. A lot of people still damaged from that period of time. But you have people with psychosis, you have people who have mental disorders, you have people who took to drinking and drugs, alcohol, post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from that period of time and whatnot, nervous breakdown, a whole assortment of ailments that came out of that period of time because, you know, you had young people. The average Panther was between the ages of 17, 22. That was the average age of a Panther, 23 maybe. So we referred to Eldridge as Papa Rage. You know, Eldridge was in his 30s, you know, so that was considered old. So you had a lot of youth that came into the party, and they gave very committed and very, very committed young people who came into the party. We lived in a time in the 1960s when it was a very tumultuous decade, you know. It was an exciting time, you know, and we were in a position to bring about some major changes in this country. You know, it was at a point in time when we really could have came very close to changing this government permanently, you know, and I've never, in my study of history, I haven't known any other time where we came that close to bringing about a revolution in the United States, you know, which would have affected our lives. We'd have been in a much better place today. Bobby and Huey, having an understanding of Marxism, Leninism, and Maoist thought, and the overall black movement at the time, a lot of elements of the black movement knew that we would be in for a protracted struggle, and that we knew that we would have to have a military apparatus to even defend any type of organization for security and other aspects that an organization of that type would need. In the early days of the Black Panther Party, it was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. So arms was a very key factor in the development of the Black Panther Party. In terms of its military wing, Bunchy Carter, Deputy Minister of Defense for the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party, LA. He came into the Black Panther Party after prison, after having met Eldridge in Folsom. I think they were in Folsom. Bunchy was a brother off the street. In political terms, we refer to as the lumping element. Bunchy was the leader of a very strong and large gang in LA called the Slauson Street. Bunchy virtually coming into the Black Panther Party brought a whole military wing into the Black Panther Party. The LA chapter, they recognized from the very onstart that it would be a need for an element of people, underground element to protect the party. They created a thing called the Wolverine, the Wolves. They functioned. A lot of those brothers never became known as Panther members. A lot of them did recruitment and other things for the Black Panther Party. Now, you had a lot of people coming to the Black Panther Party that was Vietnam vets. We had Geronimo Pratt. They had military expertise, and they put that to work for the Black Panther Party. I mean, it saved a lot of lives, and it prevented more provocations and shootouts than probably would have taken place. The the party being an organization that had an open door policy, which allowed for all kinds of people to join the party. You know, it was a party where anybody could join the Black Panther Party. And even though it had a security apparatus and tried to screen out people, that open door policy allowed for a lot of informants and agent provocateurs to come into the party and create havoc and disruption. You know, I would say that there were Panthers, especially in the LA chapter, who never became known to the public as Panther members, who did things for the party, a military fashion for the party, and protected the party. And I would suppose that existed in other chapters around the country. There was always security apparatus, but the Army really took off when the counterintelligence program from 68 and 69 on, when the heat of all that was coming down and Panthers were being murdered around the country, that's when the was having its formative years, you know, in contemporary times. Because we talked earlier about the BLA having a concept going back years and years and years before that. And the BLA, you know, why it got its birth from the Black Panther Party. Many people came in, some people, a lot of people who were never Panthers became drafted by the Black Liberation Army. The BLA, things that I was proud of the BLA is that it was never ever infiltrated. That's not to say that people didn't get captured and give up information, but it was never infiltrated because you didn't join the BLA or pick the BLA picked you. You know, many people was chosen and called, and people had a right to where you could go and join the BLA. You know, those people were handpicked, and cadres and cells picked their people, and were able to function that way. You know, autonomously from other cells. All cells wasn't autonomous, but there were a lot of cells who were autonomous from each other, and that kept down informants and. I mean, people informing on certain things within BLA because you could only deal with your cell at your particular time. Then the BLA had a policy of the cells that I function with. We had a policy of that 24-hour period. You know, the Algerian we took that concept from them. Give us 24 hours and we could move. And in most cases, it was much less than 24 hours because we knew that once people was captured, what they were going to be up against. You know, so I mean, and our whereabouts with our comrades was known all the time. We knew where people was at, and if you could not be accounted for, that, and so you know we pretty much function, you know, safely that way. One of the goals were to try and alleviate some of the oppression, the naked violence that was taking place against the above ground movement, Black liberation movement as a whole around this country. There were a lot of killings within the Black community, especially here in New York City. Cops was throwing young kids off rooftops. And out of all these police murders, they were always justifiable homicide. We could not no longer stand by and have that continue to exist, you know. Our position that since the Black community was very defenseless at that time, that we would take some of that pressure off the Black community and we would absorb some of that. To know that there was going to be some forces that they would have to deal with if they continued to deal with the Black community in the manner in which they were doing, and the Black liberation movement. The BLA, not just the Black community as we know it, but also our prisoners and whatnot. The BLA took a very strong position around those brothers being murdered at Attica. And if my memory served me correctly, there was some actions taken in behalf of those Attica brothers. Panthers. The same thing with George Jackson. All you kept moving in the manner in which you were moving. And as our youth would have us to be rather audacious, household or the oppressor's household, you know, and there had to be funerals on both sides. That you know, we could no longer continue to exist in the manner in which we was existing at that time. The people that I worked with that came out of prisons, they were highly politicized when they came out. They had studied inside of prison. They were in formations in prisons who sent them to us, thought they would make good soldiers. And it wasn't about taking a raw recruit and having to sit him down and politicize him. But I must say this, there were, with his political education, some brothers and sisters were more politicized than other brothers and sisters. And sometimes your politicalization affects the position you may take in terms of making a move or doing certain things and whatnot. But there were uneven political development in Blah, you understand? But we were always conscious of this, and we were always, even in the situations that we found ourselves in at that time, we studied underground. We didn't just, it wasn't just about guns and bombs and that sort of thing. I mean, we had to study. From the day of the Black Panther Party to the last Blah person went to prison, I mean, we studied. You know, it wasn't just about all armed struggle and no study. You know, there were medical cadre and personnel, and there were doctors, there were nurses, there were people who could, you know, deal with trauma, injuries that could deriving out of that, you know. Yeah, I mean, it was developed. It wasn't developed to our fullest extent what we would like to have had it been, but we were able to save some comrades' lives that way, and brothers was able to keep on fighting, you know. I mean, everybody, a lot of people, there are those who didn't die because they received medical help. And if they died later on, the powers that be was surprised that there were other marks that would have taken them out maybe 2 years ago. So yeah, it worked very well, you know. Well, that's in any underground, any movement. You got to have your medical thing intact, you know, or you should have. No, it wasn't just about individual dealing with arms. People in the Black Liberation Army worked on many levels. You know, there were people who worked on medical levels. There were people who worked on transportation. There were people who worked on housing. The overall Black Liberation Movement. Now, we came out of the Black Liberation Movement, and that movement supported us. We were as strong as our movement was. If the movement became weak through oppression from the powers that be, that means that Blah is going to be weak. You know, we were only as strong as the movement, and our victories was the movement's victories. Those individuals who would house us and whatnot, they were movement people. Those people had 9-to-5 jobs. They was doctors, nurses, and lawyers, or whoever they may have been. John Q, sister, my aunt, your grandmother. These were the people that was housing us and whatnot, and making us safe. And they looked out for us. And these was people from our community. After all, and a lot of times when people ask us questions about or the Black Panther Party, a lot of times they ask questions. A lot of us came into the movement with the same hang-ups that somebody have on the avenue. The sister on the avenue or the brother in the bar and whatnot, we came into the Black Panther Party with all those warts. The only thing that made us different was that we were willing to change. But when we became politicized and people started looking at us as if we came from somewhere else, the powers that be, they would try to drive a wedge between us and the Black community, but we were the Black community. You know, that they would say, they would write things like we were outlaws and the black community disowned us. It's just bullshit. How you gonna disown us? We were the black community, you know? And like our support, because we didn't have the newspapers, we didn't control that. But we could go in any bar, any barbershop, a hair salon, and the night before, and people would be ranting and raving about what those ladies and men did the night before, you know. So I mean, you know, we were well accepted in the black community. If we were not, we would not have been able to exist. We would have been turned in. Very few people in the Black Liberation Army, very few who were turned in by informants. We usually got captured in military action, not that someone snitched on us over there. We were protected well, and this was the wishes of the black community. We had working relationship with many organizations, RNA, close relationships with prison movement, other revolutionary nationalist formations that was out there and whatnot. You know, I mean, like I say, we was from the black community, and any progressive people that we could work with, we worked with them, and we was about coalition building and solidarity with a lot of people, man. The Native American movement, the Chicano movement, you understand, the Young Lords, all people of color and people, or progressive people, period. We work with them, you know, and where we could do actions together, we did that. And we some dealt with different levels of actions and some didn't. So, you know, I mean, but like, oh yes, no question. We believed on the united front. Expropriations were for the movement. It was not for individual gains or whatnot. We made withdrawals from the capitalist banks to further the revolution. We had to run underground. It takes a great deal of money. I mean, you gotta have cars, you gotta have apartments, you gotta have housing. You're moving around. You spend a great deal of money and whatnot. So it takes money to run a revolution. And so, like those expropriations were not done for selfish gains. We weren't trying to buy a house or to make a coat of a Cadillac. We had practically taken a vow of poverty, because most of us had nothing but what was on our backs and whatnot. And we wasn't trying to get rich doing that. A lot of money went for legal fees, bailing people out, making sure people's common service stacked, you know, brothers didn't have to suffer or want for much if they were captured. A lot of our time was spent in terms of trying to liberate brothers who were captured. So, you know, it takes money to run any kind of struggle. I think that we should keep in mind that Blob, being a military wing of the liberation movement, and the political, but the Black Panther Party dealt with that early on. If you remember, Bobby Nose went to Sacramento with guns, and that was because the law of California at that time allowed you to have guns, and you could have them openly, and you could have them in a car as long as a round wasn't in the chamber. In New York at the same time, New York's laws was different. It had a solvent law, meaning you could get up to 5 years, I think, at that time, for having a concealed weapon. California, you could have your weapon out in the open and whatnot. And so the party in its early days coming out of California, you understand, they were able to deal with that from a legal point of view in terms of carrying arms. When the legislature, Ronald Reagan, being the governor at the time, wanted to take away that law, that's when they marched on Sacramento. And, you know, that's when the party We know that a lot of times when we're captured in prison, that we have to deal with the bourgeois legal system. But it's our job to expose that system for its shortcomings and its inaccuracies and its injustices toward the people that they've captured and whatnot. In exposing the system in this country, any aspect of its system, what it's supposed to do for its people, or what it claims to do, that's educating the masses of people. Once the people become educated that the system is not working, this is a contradiction. Some other things. So that's why these trials, that's why when you go to these courtrooms, that's why those brothers and sisters on trial, they're educating the masses about the contradiction within the judicial system and about why they're receiving so much time as opposed to somebody else doing a more heinous crime. See, we take the fight is not just on the battlefield in the streets. The fight is also in the judicial system. The fight is against all aspects of this government's its laws and how oppressive they are and how unfair they are. So when we go off in the courtroom and don't allow the trial to proceed and we disrupt the trial and we're not having it or we're not coming out and whatnot, the mass will see that. And the first, the mass say there's some crazy motherfuckers there. But then on the other hand, they can see the contradictions. That's what we're talking about and whatnot. The same thing with Sunday out of College trial, the 21 and whatnot. The 21, you had individuals in the 21 trial who defended themselves. Fanny Shakur, she was one of her. She defended herself and she did it eloquently. And she pointed out all the contradiction in that 157 count indictment they brought against them. You know what I'm saying? And a 2-year trial, the most costly trial, 2 years. I mean, you know, like, something's fundamentally wrong with that thing, you know. Now, some people would say, well, the equivalent of Sunday out and the 21, that's, first of all, who's going to give him his 2 years back? Loss of employment. Name smeared through the mud. They was accused of going to blow up Mason's department store, Botanical Gardens, the subway system in New York City. Yeah, you see, they was talking about that for the people. They were going to blow up on Easter Sunday. So these are the contradictions, man, you know, that they were able to expose and whatnot at that time. And same thing with the BLA trials. All those trials were disruptive trials because we wasn't going to go to the penitentiary willingly. Well, we knew that a lot of times there were incidents there where they threw down on us first in terms of these armed confrontations and whatnot. And we just had like I said, if there had to be funerals, there'd be funerals on both sides. Some of the differences with the Deacons for Defense, you see, my understanding of history around the Deacons for Defense, here's some brothers and sisters came out of Bogalusa, Louisiana, because it was a very oppressive place. And it was also a place where the civil rights movement had failed to go into, certain parts of Louisiana. You see history of marching in Alabama. Louisiana was off the charts. This one was strong, right. brothers back in the woods and whatnot, they put that defense around the civil rights movement. And I think it's very, very unfair to them to not have been recognized as such, because the civil rights is about nonviolence. They didn't want to talk about the people with the guns and whatnot and people who stood up like that. And that does a disservice to all movement. It does a disservice to Black people. It does a disservice in terms of our history and whatnot. When we don't talk about that aspect of our history and whatnot, when we try to criminalize that aspect of our history and say they're just a bunch of thugs and whatnot, and then they're off the street and whatnot. Everybody wasn't being beaten and water hosed down and turning the other cheek. You know, we know that from Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman. We know that with John Brown and Harper's Ferry and the raid and whatnot. And if you go a little further in that history there, then you have to ask yourself, why didn't Frederick Douglass, why wasn't he on that raid? Harriet Tubman and the rest of them. Now, Harriet Tubman, that's my hero in that. I mean, I love this woman, man. But, I mean, so don't take the position that those brothers and sisters that out there like that and who put their lives on the line, that it didn't matter, that it was just a futile attempt. A lot of those brothers in the Deacons for Defense, they left Louisiana. A lot of them came into the North in Chicago and became taxi drivers and melted off into history and what. Always conservative and passive and just dying peacefully. You know, that's ridiculous, man. You know, if we're going to tell the history of Black people in this country, we need to tell all aspects of it, the good, bad, and the ugly. We need to talk about all of that there. And then let the chips fall where they may. You know, I mean, we bleed all over the world, but we ain't, like Malcolm said, we ain't got no blood when it comes to us, you know. That's legitimate. Most places, for much less than what have happened to us here, you know. I mean, for much less, you know. We're not talking about integration here. We're talking about just pure, simple freedom. You know, I mean, to be left alone, to be safe in your home and whatnot, to be, you have some intellectual prizes to pursue, all that you can. Why did we to point to Black children who become exceptional scholars or go into space? Why, I mean, with the restraints that they've had against them, they were able to make those achievements, but why should we have to have those kind of restraints? What about the rest of our population that wasn't able to reach those heights because they were suppressed, exploited, not given the chance, you know? That's freedom to me. When a question like that, it is what the Black Liberation Movement did and what Blah was able to the extent it was able to protect that movement to allow it to do those things. You're talking about mass front, masses of people and setting programs in place and whatnot. Blah was not in a position to do that. Blah was in a position to protect its movement. That was his goal, to protect its people. So the movement was able to develop and go on, you know, and the movement, and you know, the Black Liberation Movement, the jury's not in on that yet. You know, now is jury in on blah. You know, I mean, so like, cause there's still a manifestation of all that still taking place today and whatnot. That's why we have the Sanford, these people in their late 50s and in the early 70s. And they're being taken, so the ramifications of that period of time is still with us today and whatnot. And it also is manifesting, that period of time and that history is manifesting itself in the hip hop world today. You know, that's why you have, you know, as opposed to say 5 or 6 years ago, there seemed to have been a transformative development within the hip hop consciousness, you know, 10 years ago. Hell, Alicia Keys recently made a comment about it, they needed another Black Panther Party. It wasn't, these things were not taking place in the last 10, 15 years. They are doing research on that period and that history and whatnot. Unlike our times from the 60s, struggle was all about culture, all aspects of our culture. You had James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. You had people doing anti-drug songs during that. You had Last Poet talking about revolution and whatnot. Nikki Giovanni and her poetry. Little known sister Valerie Valerie Johnson. In that period in time, you know, addressing the condition within the Black community, you know, and so it was easy to organize then because oppression was so blatant and so in your face, and why it is still blatant in some quarters in our community. So people have a tendency to think that it's not happening to them. It's like Malcolm did the analogy about you go to the dentist and he give you some Novocaine and you sitting there bleeding with blood running down your jaw. Don't even know you're in pain. So a lot of us, you know, we say some people take the position that was the civil rights, but we not with that. That ain't happening to us now. Until he walk out in the street and have his face get blown off by the police department. He get beat into the cement out there. He found himself railroaded to one of the state penitentiaries with a life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. He go before a jury, and it's all a white jury, and they looking at him like he's crazy. If he didn't commit the crime, he just ought to have committed. You know, so I mean, you know, like I think oppression breeds a lot of resistance because you know people take it so long. That's all. The myth is that we were outlaws, that we were divorced from the Black community, that no one knew us in the Black community, that we had no support in the Black community. That was myth. We would not have been able to exist without the Black community. We sought refuge in the Black community. The Black community housed us, made us safe. And when we ran out of arms and couldn't get our own arms, they supplied us with arms. That was the Black community. The Black Liberation Army comes from the Black community. Make no mistake about that. That 13-year-old used to just pass on the street, out that little girl skipping rope or doing double dutch down the block. Tomorrow morning, 4 or 5 years. Depends on how her life goes and how this government treats her. You know? So those are some of the myths and whatnot. You know, the Black Liberation Army have did wonders in helping black people self-esteem. Because like I say, when you see that you're being beaten into the cement, a lot of funerals of your people and nobody else is paying for this shit, that's like a whole situation. That's demoralizing. No one should have to live like that. And you shouldn't want to bring your children up in a society like that. Imagine what that's doing to a 6 or 7-year-old, seeing someone drug down the stair, 4 or 5 flights of stairs and whatnot, beaten to death, and then there's no justice. There's nothing happens behind that. That person is being scarred. That is psychological violence against the youth, So, we think that even in our loss and those who died and whatnot, we think that it was the right thing to do at that period in time. Given the information that we had at that period in time, if we had no other information out there, then we would do it all over again tomorrow in a heartbeat, the same way. Because we only can make decisions on what we have and what we know. Fear makes people act strangely. And we have to understand fear. We can't hold that against some people. It was fear. It was fear from the counterintelligence program. It was fear how they was moving on us and how they came down on the black community, certain elements in the black. People had their doors kicked in, was not even focused on it. Search for us. It was fear. And so we understand what fear can do. If the liberation movement, the Black liberation movement as a whole, had it been stronger, we would have been able to weather that storm there. But the people, man, we didn't just deal with the local police department, the counterintelligence program. We was dealing with the Central Intelligence Agency, Army Security, Naval Security. All of these people spied on the Black liberation movement in this country and the BLA. We got tons and tons and tons of files that the counterintelligence program kept on individuals and whatnot. Now, mind you, all this paperwork that they kept on, and a lot of us, man, like I say, we weren't even 25 years old at that time. And so that kind of people, But again, I say, if the Black liberation movement was stronger, we will be only as strong as our movement. If the civil rights movement, if other elements in the community had supported us, it wouldn't have been that way. It would not have turned out that way. We, from people, we want to do what the people do. We don't have the power to get it much before all those deaths took place. I suppose that an apology would be in order for the young people, because we didn't accomplish our goal, because our intentions were to make it a much better place for those who was going to come after us, and we would have hoped that university making a recording, you could be out with your booth somewhere, chilling out or dancing on the floor, instead of trying to have to deal with struggle. But we didn't win. We didn't, but the jury's still out. The struggle still continues. Our elected officials, the Black officials, and the Black so-called leaders, they don't have on Obama. They talking about president. I can't see voting for anybody if he ain't talking about freeing some political prisoners. Why shouldn't that? Why aren't people confronting people about that? Hillary Clinton, for that matter. Bill Clinton cut loose a few people when he left office and whatnot. Some people but he didn't cut loose any Black political prisoners, and he didn't free Lily Peltier. I'm not saying that those people that he did give pardons to didn't deserve it, because they most certainly, but If the elected officials don't start speaking about political prisoners in the black community, you put pressure on them to speak about these people and whatnot. You talk about Nelson Mandela, we got Nelson Mandela, we got Sundar Coley, we got Herman Bell, we got Jalil Montgomery, we got Bashir Hamid, we got all these political prisoners across the country, man. Those are our Nelson Mandela. We're not safe to worship people from afar because they don't have the same conversations and what. Nelson Mandela to even get to tell him about our political prisoners in this country. That is not publicized, and they're not saying it on a public forum where it can be heard. You understand? In the meantime, we got people that have been locked up 35 and 40 years, and you're talking about political prisoners. When you talk about political prisoners, you must always talk about our political exile, because we want them home too, without charges. There's no reason why Sada Shakur should need to be in Cuba and couldn't come to her mother's funeral, or her daughter's graduation, or the birth of her grandchildren. There's no need. We need to be crying out for those. All of our political prisoners need to be returned to the United States if they so desire. Southern Wales, he's been out of the country almost 40 years. He's been in exile longer than a lot of us have been alive. You know, that's our desire to come back no more, him and Shaw. And not just them, you got DC languishing down in the south of France. And the other brothers who were in France and in Egypt and elsewhere in North Africa is in exile. We need, every time political prisoners is mentioned, our political exiles must be mentioned. There needs to be a campaign for those people to return to this country and whatnot, because a lot of them left here on trumped up charges, man, and that was fabricated by the government. And as a result of our movement benefiting from it, our people taking that brunt force off young citizens on the street in Bed-Stuy, Harlem, and saying that we'll deal with this ourselves. That took some of the pressure at the time off the black community. And that's what we wanted to do, you know. And then we found out that when we stepped out there and whatnot, they weren't all that bad and whatnot. It's a question of who lays down the most firepower. That's who wins the day. They ain't all that invincible. You understand? They're cowards, really. Because anytime that you get up in the morning, man, and kiss your missus goodbye and strap on that gun and come into the black community and brutalize our people and whatnot, you're a coward. You're a coward. This community, our community, is the most defenseless community on the face of the earth, with the exception of the prison population. We have nothing to defend ourselves, you know. So they murder, kill, rape, jail us, and do what they want to do with impunity. So there was a period in time we can always go back to and say that wasn't happening like that. And that day will come again if the conditions don't change, because conditions breeds resistance. I always have. I always will. Did a good job. I just think that in closing, I would just say free all our political prisoners and bring our exiles home.
I guess deep. So when we talk about political prisoners, blood, sweat, and years and tears went into these movements, man. Well, People got to understand that, pay homage and respect the people that have paved the way in a real way. But at the end of the day, same shit's rearing its head, and we gotta stay vigilant, stay more wise than ever. Realize, recognize what's going on. Push forward for the better. It's your boy Matt Mizzle. You know my slogan. Salute to the BGF and the BLA. Real freedom fighters in the trenches. I'm out.